The California Mille was created specifically to celebrate the art of the automobile. The four-day event kicks off in late April with a special fundraising celebration at the Fairmont Hotel on top of San Francisco's historic Nob Hill.
Thank you very much. I want to thank everybody for bringing the good weather, those of you from outside the state. If only San Francisco was this nice every day, none of us could afford to live here.
Martin Swig, founder of the California Mille, along with a group of organizers, have turned this event into one of the premier vintage car tours in the world. And it is the only one in the United States recognized by the organizers of the original Mille Miglia in Italy. On a sun-drenched Sunday, Nob Hill becomes a showcase for these exquisite automobiles. From ascots and blazers to shorts and jeans, hundreds of car enthusiasts marvel and fantasize about these elite automobiles. This year's rally features Alfa Romeo, mechanic wonders designed with a precise aesthetic. Other rare autos include the 1950 Curtiss, the 55 Jaguar XKSS, and the 1956 Moretti. All of these automobiles have one thing in common. They are exceptional works of industrial art. The California Mille is patterned after Italy's famous Mille Miglia, an annual race of roughly 1,000 miles. This year's California Mille will see Alfa Romeo, Aston Martin, Maserati, Mercedes-Benz, Jaguar, Ferrari, Porsche, AC Bristol, and Bugatti.
We drove this car in some rallies in Europe. Notably, we drove it in my wife and I drove it in the Nuvolari rally in Italy. And a couple of years ago, we did a spectacular rally called the Rally des Alpes. It's just been a very touched lots of wood, dependable car in the times we've rallied it so far. And we'd had a lot of fun rallying this car in Europe. And everybody said, you've got to do some US rallies. And Martin Swig said that the best one to do was the California Mille, so here we are.
I had been reading about the Mille in car magazines for some years back and thought it was a fabulous trip, and one day I would like to enter, but I did have to get myself a car that would be accepted in the rally. And so we bought the Jaguar expressly to do this race, this rally, and it is just been wonderful. There's so many nice people here and so many fabulous cars that it's really a nice experience to take part in.
And one day I was lying on the couch watching the news and they were talking about the California Mille, Fairmont Hotel, San Francisco, and I said, wait, what's going on here? So when Brenda came back, I said, do you know they have a Mille in California, in San Francisco? She goes, really? So she started investigating a little bit, and the next thing I know, she said, it's an Alfa year. I got an Alfa.
The Alfa's a great car. It's a 1931 Alfa Romeo 6C 1750 Grand Sport Zagato. Big long name. We got it from a friend who had it in his barn. It wasn't running, and we restored it.
It's a rather strange car. It's a 1940 Aston Martin Speed Model Type C. It was, they built 8 of these cars. There's 5 left. This is one of them. It's a schizophrenic car. Looked at from the back, it's quite an attractive car. Looked at from the front, it's very much an ugly duckling.
This is a Europa Cabriolet Ferrari designed by Pininfarina. It was designed and built as a one-off car. Under the hood is a all-aluminum V12 double overhead cam motor. And it has 3 Weber carburetors and it does about 220 horse. This is a 1957 Jaguar XK140 fixed head coupe, and there were only 28 made in that year. It is one of the most fabulous cars I've ever driven.
I have a key, this unusual key. I basically put it in, press it in, and there's a starter button. Hit the starter button, it always starts. Always. It's always perfect. I've never had an electrical problem with this car. So when you ask me about the electrical system, it's great. You know, they give us mileage on our little route book, but we don't have an odometer, so that doesn't matter to us. At any rate, we have the wonderful things that help us on our trip. For instance, I have a gas gauge. Now, that's unusual for a car this age to have a gas gauge. I'll show you my gas gauge. Here's my gas gauge. It's your typical dowel rod that's been fashioned in a fashion that lets me check the gas. So you just drop it in, you pull it out, and there you go. You know you have a half a tank.
Like the famed Italian Mille, the California Mille draws cars from around the world. Sport racing cars made before 1958 are the only automobiles eligible for this prestigious event. These cars are vintage sports cars with long, bulging hoods, sweeping fenders, mechanical precision, and powerful engines.
Back in the late 20s, there was a group of 4 well-born young Italians in the town and province of Brescia. Brescia is about midway between Milano and Venezia, and they were, I guess they were sort of playboys. They were certainly well-born and had means to live the good life. They liked cars, and they decided to organize a race from Brescia to Rome and back. And I think the real purpose was just to raise hell with their cars, but their stated purpose was to demonstrate the good state of Italian roads. Remember, this is in the late 20s, so not so far into the age of motoring. So they started this race, which was about 1,600 kilometers. They thought British stuff was pretty neat. British clothing, British style, British stuff. So the British measurement of non-metric miles, 1,000 miles. 1,000 miles is better than 1,600 chilometri. So they did this race in 1927 for the first time. Now, the roads in Italy in 1927, a lot of them were dirt. To go 1,000 miles on these little old roads from town to town in the dirt took, I don't know, maybe 20 hours. For the smaller cars, maybe 30 hours. I mean, it was a real endurance deal. But it was sort of a hit. And so it was repeated every year. And it was interrupted by the war years, was revived again after the war. And by that time, car manufacturers around the world were seeing this as a real demonstration and test of the car's ability. The high point came in 1955. Mercedes-Benz spent a lot of time and effort developing a car and a program to win, which they did. With Sterling Moss, who was a rather well-known British driver, he drove 1,000 miles on these little give and take little roads, 1,000 miles in 10 hours, 100-mile-an-hour average. That was pretty neat. The next 2 years, 56 and 57, it got faster and faster. It was raced on open public roads. I mean, traffic was controlled, but things happened. And finally in 57, there was a horrible accident, and that was the end. It was just too dangerous to race on public roads anymore. Well, the people in Brescia, it was really their deal, and it was dead. And by the early 80s, they decided it would be nice to revive the Mille as a tour for historic racing cars that would have done it in the first place. And I heard about it, so I spoke to the Italians and I said, we're going to do something in California and we'd hope to have your blessing. We'd like to call it California Mille. Well, they said Mille, that only exists in Italy. He said, but maybe California Mille. I said, okay. The last year the Italian Mille ran was 1957, when there was this horrible accident that ended it. Any car appropriate to have run at one of the original series of Mille can only be 57 or older. This has now been our 14th year doing this, and it sort of takes hold of your life. It's fun.
Classic car owners from throughout the United States, England, Japan, and Australia have shipped their vehicles to San Francisco for the opportunity to be in the California Mille. All the vehicles have original machinery and components and are very well preserved. The rally begins Monday at 7:30 a.m. when the cars drive out of the Fairmont for the trip around Northern California. The tour drives through some of the most scenic countryside of Northern California. Monday, they wind through western Marin and Sonoma counties and over to Mendocino, where the drivers spend their first night. The route continues through Ferndale and Humboldt County, across to Redding and Nevada's Incline Village, before ending up Thursday afternoon at their final stop, the Sonoma Mission Inn. Chrysler, a major sponsor of the event, supplies support vehicles to assist the drivers as needed. The mechanics are authorized to spend up to 30 minutes on a car. After that, it goes on to the flatbed. Many car collectors lock their classic cars up in a museum. These are driven.
Thanks, Dan.
Typically we're traveling 1,000 miles. We do that in 4 days. So break it down. That's about 250 miles a day. And that's about 125 miles in the morning and about 125 miles in the afternoon. But you want to stop at nice places. Nice place overnight, something interesting for lunch. And so you really have to work it out so it's an interesting drive in the morning and arrive at a nice lunch spot. An interesting drive in the afternoon, not like the drive in the morning, but some variety, different topography, different altitude, different type of road, different something. And so you do that for 4 days, and that's 8 segments. And you have to end up at the right place and make it all flow together nicely.
It's just so much fun to drive. You're out in the open air, you have the sky above you, you have the wind in your face, and just motor on. It has a beautiful sound to it. It's a great drive.
You have a long hood in front of you. The engine is very quiet when you're running, but you feel the power. And when you get it out on the open highway, it just runs just beautifully.
Driving a car like this is an in-your-face experience. But if it's raining or hailing or snowing or they're painting stripes down the road or whatever, it's all in your face. And even, there is a top for it actually, and even if you put it up, there's no side curtains. So you get completely wet. It's a real environmental experience driving this car. On the best of days, like we expect to have on this one, to sit behind the wheel and drive it is a wonderful experience. What adds a nice excitement to this car is that the gas pedal and the brake pedal are reversed. So that where you're used to having the gas and brake, it's the opposite. So you have to sort of factor that into your driving repertoire.
To drive this is more like driving a jet. The motor doesn't sound like a regular motor, it just whines at a very high pitch. And once it gets rolling, it drives very, very well, very smooth. They're still 50s cars. They're a little stodgy, and the brakes are a little, they're not disc, so you still got to watch it when you come to a stop. And so, but in terms of a 50 car, it doesn't get too much better.
It's a big difference between driving a 1933 car and a 1950 sports car. And now the Bugattis were known for their power, and has good power, but the suspension and brakes, and it has cable brakes, for instance, compared to hydraulic brakes. So they're mechanical brakes, so you got to use, you know, my knee hurts on my right leg from the brake. It's also a center gas car. It's the gas pedal is in the middle between the brake and the clutch. So as you're driving, you're constantly telling yourself, center gas, center gas, center gas. Should someone go to pull out in front of you, you want to make sure you step to the right on the brake and not on the gas. So there's all these things going through your mind. It's got a gearbox that's a bit, actually for a Bugatti it shifts very nicely, but it's a bit cantankerous compared to a synchro mesh gearbox. It's a crash box, as they say in the old days, so you got a double clutch up and double clutch down. Everything on it's gear driven, so the engine, the camshafts are gear driven, the supercharger's gear driven, and the transmission is a straight cut gear. So as you're cruising down the highway, all you hear is whirring gears, and that's the comment everybody makes as they pass us, is saying, you know, is that supposed to be making that noise? You know, and we say yes, you know, but it's the gear noise is louder than the exhaust noise, for instance. So it's a non-pressurized cooling system, so on hot days that we've had this record heat in California, we haven't boiled over, but we've been right on the edge. And then all that heat that's generated up front in those early cars like that, they had no insulation and nothing, and so the heat that's generated in the engine just blows right back up into your face. By the end of the day, your lower extremities are medium rare, I think. So,
the car that I've been driving this week is a 1928 car. Now, that car didn't have hydraulic brakes. It has mechanical brakes, which are not very good. The gearbox isn't synchronized. I don't know, probably most of today's motors don't even know what that means, but it's really hard to shift gears. And the steering isn't very easy. So you really have to be a much better, more attentive driver to conduct this not very able machine down the road.
The roads were very, very rough. And so, of course, when you're driving in, it's like, and constantly turning, and some of the hairpin turns we got into, I mean, I'm going over these mountain roads, and in first and second gear, that car is a handful.
In the end, if you love the machinery and you love the car, I can't imagine anything more exhilarating. All of the people who do this really understand and are fascinated and charmed by these cars. It's about really preserving these really pieces of industrial art, and so we like to play with them together. It's more fun to play together than independently. It's really that simple. One thing that shows through in these cars, most of these are the real thoroughbreds of their time. And just the inherent technical and mechanical goodness, even though they've been superseded by more modern technologies and better techniques and all of that, these are really good cars. They're really a pleasure to drive. You have to understand them and, you know, drive them in a way that they were meant to be driven, not expect them to perform like new cars, but to expect them to be as good as they were when they were.
Old cars should be driven, and that part of the excitement of owning these is the experiencing them as well, is getting that experience in them. And I think as long as you drive them carefully and in a controlled manner, and you know, we always think about the value as we drive, but well, I mean, if we think about before we get in the car, once you're in the car, you just treat it like you treat any other car and how you would. You drive a little bit defensively, you drive, you know, you're always keeping an eye out for a fallen rock or the other guy on the road, but you just, you know, you don't really think about, like what I've told people before when they've asked me that question is, well, when you're behind the wheel, you can't really get yourself sidetracked with the value of something. You've got to just keep your wits about you. You just drive it like you would drive a normal sports car.
It was a great drive. The roads are just excellent to drive. At a certain times they were a little bit tough. All the curves, especially when you're driving an older car with a steering wheel that you have to turn 3 times just to make a little curve. It makes it difficult, but it was great. I'll do it again.
The car was getting a bit tight at the end. You know, it's 1940. We did a lot of back roads, bouncy roads, you know, where the car was really getting banged around. And I know the old Bugatti was struggling with the same problem. So the tacho gave up, but that was the only thing. We lost charge, we managed to fix that. But I mean, we're here.
Yes, we're not lost it.
The car acted wonderfully. Going up some of the long straight hills, it was rather tough on the radiator, and so we overheated a couple of times, but you pull off, add some water, wait for 10 minutes, and then we proceeded on our way, and it was wonderful.
It was a great, great run. I loved it. We knew it'd be fun, but it was a lot more fun than I thought. And it's nice, you know, there were so many women on this run. Some of them drove, some of them didn't drive.
but they're very supportive of the men that do it. And so we were kind of racing for the women.
So I expected it to be fun, but everything exceeded my expectations. It was a thrill.
I'll tell you, this is the first opportunity I've had to drive that car on these kinds of roads. And the roads in Northern California that we were on, for the most part, were spectacular. The scenery was great, but the roads were great. And that car on those roads, I mean, I often sat there thinking about what it would have been like in 1933 or 4 or 5 driving a car like that around here.